Holding a tablet thousands of years old and being able to understand its message is like traveling through time. Archaeologists believe they knew the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia well, until a single clay tablet emerged from the rubble of Shuruppak. The Sumerian tablets, among the oldest written records of humanity, had already been translated before, and narrated myths about gods, the creation of men, and the destruction of the city by the Great Flood. But that tablet was different. The markings were faint, the purpose unknown, and no one could read a single line. When an experimental AI was activated, only a standard translation was expected. Instead, the machine identified unexpected patterns and revealed something that sounded like a warning, something no one was prepared for. The discovery began on a sweltering afternoon near Telfera, a site associated with ancient Shuruppak, destroyed around 2900 BC. Archaeologists were searching for only common remains, such as damaged walls and broken pottery, when the ground gave way beneath a worker's feet. The collapse revealed a small chamber sealed for millennia, buried under layers of mud bricks. Illuminated by a flashlight, the space appeared intact and unsettling. Carbon dating placed the site precisely within the period of the earliest flood legends. Charred animal bones, broken pottery, and an abandoned reed basket suggested a hasty escape. There were no human remains, but everything indicated a moment frozen in fear. In the center of the chamber, a thick clay casing caught the eye. Molded to withstand fire, impact, and water, it protected something considered too important to be left to chance. That alone made the discovery profoundly strange. Clay tablets from that period were almost never sealed in protective capsules. When the casing was opened, the team found a single clay tablet inside. It was in perfect condition. It survived because an ancient fire in the chamber had baked it, making it extremely resistant. The tablet bore inscriptions so faint that the naked eye could barely perceive them. Light revealed subtle markings that suggested deliberate coding or extreme antiquity. The tablet felt heavy in the archaeologist's hands. It was heavier than any other tablet ever recovered from Shuruppak, indicating that the clay used in its creation had been carefully selected. It was built to last. An excavation camera captured delicate engraving patterns around the edges of the tablet. These markings did not correspond to any known Shuruppak writing style. They seemed foreign, out of place. The chief archaeologist observed those strange markings and stated, in a low voice, that it wasn't an administrative record, but rather a message intended for someone in the future. The team considered the possibility that the tablet had been created by someone who believed a disaster was coming. Shuruppak was associated with the figure known as Utnapishtim, also called Ziusudra, who appears in ancient flood stories. This connection made the discovery even more unsettling. When the tablet was taken to the laboratory, the team found that none of the markings matched any known Sumerian catalog. The tablet wasn't just ancient, it was encrypted. The only thing capable of reading it was an advanced AI system that had never been designed for archaeology. The tablet that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. From the moment researchers unearthed it from the shallow dust of the site, there was a sense that something about it violated the rules of Mesopotamian archaeology. The Shuruppak tablets are usually mundane. They contain lists of barley rations, records of livestock exchanges, simple work accounts. They belong to the silent world of scribes who documented the rhythm of a city on the edge of the floodplain. But that tablet was not silent. It seemed deliberately crafted in a way that made the staff uneasy. Its clay surface displayed a pattern of symbols that didn't align with any known administrative purpose. Even its texture seemed different, denser, almost excessively fired, as if the scribe wanted the tablet to outlive the building that had once housed it. The inscriptions were compact, almost compressed, occupying all the available space. At first glance, the lines resembled the wedge-shaped strokes of archaic proto-cuneiform. However, upon closer inspection, scholars identified repeated groupings that did not make sense for an economical writing system. Some groups represented water, others suggested the sky, and still others resembled rhythmic sequences of movement. They were organized with a symmetry too precise to be random and too symbolic to be administrative. The arrangement conveyed the feeling of someone trying to say something urgent, but in a language that did not want to be easily pronounced. The repeated presence of water symbols was what most troubled them. Shurupak's identity in Mesopotamian tradition is linked, above all, to the flood. In Sumerian mythology, it is the doomed city, saved only by Ziusudra's warning, the place where the legend of the Great Flood begins. Finding a tablet in that city that seemed to reference water, sky, and movement in repetitive cycles sounded almost theatrical, like a message staged over millennia. Still, the team knew they couldn't jump to conclusions. Archaeology demands caution, even when the evidence whispers otherwise. Even so, scholars could not ignore the growing unease. Economic tablets do not use symbolic groupings. Ritual texts do, but these are generally found in temples, not in administrative rooms. Not even the so-called enigmatic tablets of Abu Salabik, strange experimental writings that still baffle experts, resembled the structure of this artifact. Those tablets were chaotic. This one seemed designed. Each symbol was positioned with mathematical precision, as if the author had constructed meaning through geometry, not words. The more the researchers analyzed, the more a disturbing truth emerged. Whoever wrote that tablet was encoding something, not just recording it. The team attempted a basic translation, but all attempts failed. When they separated the symbols into syllables, the pattern fell apart. When they grouped them by semantic class, nothing fit. When treated as numbers, the sequence became unstable. It was as if the tablet rejected human interpretation, as if it had been designed to reveal different meanings depending on the approach. Traditional linguistic tools only exposed further strangeness. By the end of the third day, one fact had become undeniable. The symbols behaved like a puzzle. Not a puzzle designed to entertain, but to conceal. The researchers were faced with something created by someone who didn't rely solely on language to preserve their warning, and this realization led the team to a decision that would change everything. They decided to perform a digital scan of the tablet, unaware that what was hidden there would drag them into a darkness for which none of them were prepared. The AI that was never supposed to decode it. The researchers turned to a machine built for a completely different purpose. The chosen AI came from an intelligence lab where it had been designed to detect hidden patterns in encrypted data. It was never intended to read ancient writing. She could only recognize unusual structures. To prepare her for the task, the engineers fed the system thousands of authentic samples of proto-cuneiform, so that she could learn what normal writing from that era looked like. Then, they loaded the high-resolution scan of the tablet. The moment the analysis began, the AI froze. It remained frozen for several long seconds because the inscriptions were riddled with overlapping microgrooves, denser than anything the machine had ever processed. The scanner wasn't supernaturally confused. She was overwhelmed by the sheer concentration of detail on the tablet's surface. When the AI finally resumed processing, its first report baffled the entire team. It didn't classify the markings as early Sumerian, nor as any known writing system. Instead, it flagged the structure as a mathematical loop. This meant that the symbols were arranged in repetitive sequences that changed depending on how they were read. The system had previously identified loop structures in encrypted files, never, however, in ancient writing. The researchers questioned the result. They thought the machine might be faulty, but the same pattern appeared in all the new scans. With each new pass, the AI revealed more internal loops and repetitive groupings that didn't behave like common language. Then it produced something even stranger. Instead of presenting translations, it started displaying isolated words. These words weren't generated directly from the tablet. They came from the AI's own training dataset. The engineers paused the test and reviewed how the machine created these labels. The explanation was simple. When the AI encountered shapes it didn't recognize, it searched its memory for the closest pattern it already understood. Upon finding a similar structure, it used a short label to describe it. These labels were a normal part of how the system functioned in intelligence analysis. They helped analysts understand what kind of anomaly they were observing. This process explained the fragments. The tablet contained groupings that resembled patterns that the AI associated with cycles, ruptures, returns, and repeated events. That's how the system produced those unsettling words. They were the machine's best attempts to describe structures it couldn't classify. With each new scan, the AI became increasingly slower. The system struggled to classify the tablet's dense patterns, but kept producing the same looping structure and the same disturbing fragments. The team decided to force a full translation attempt. None of them understood that the next step would lead them into far darker territory than they were prepared to face. The first translation. The team gathered around the monitor as the AI completed its first full pass over the tablet. No one expected a coherent translation, as most of the symbols seemed to change with each scan. Still, the machine slowly produced a block of text that paralyzed the entire room. It was short, fragmented, and written with a disturbing sense of urgency. The first line read that when the sky bends and the waters speak, the silent rise again. The language didn't resemble any common instruction or record from that period. It sounded like someone describing a world that was beginning to crumble around them. The next line asserted that this world had already drowned before, and that he would drown again. The final line of the first sequence warned that the watchmen below do not sleep. The team immediately understood that they were not dealing with a myth recorded long after the event. They were reading the words of someone who believed a disaster was unfolding in real time. As more lines appeared, the translation became clearer and more concrete. The text described sudden changes in the weather that occurred without warning. He said that the heat arrived when it should have been cold, and that storms appeared without pattern. The author stated that the crops around Shurupak began to rot in the fields, and that the soil had become soft and acidic. These descriptions corresponded to what archaeologists already knew about the city's final years. The region had suffered environmental stress, rising groundwater levels, and the collapse of irrigation systems. People reportedly saw their food supplies fail and their stability crumble. Another line mentioned that the stars disappeared over Shurupak. The AI flagged this as symbolic, but scholars understood it could refer to dust storms or atmospheric fog. The description made sense in a city made of mud bricks, surrounded by river plains that easily turned into swamps. If the river overflowed or if the storms intensified, the air could become dense enough to obscure the night sky. The author described this event with fear, but the language corresponded to a real environmental collapse. Then, the translation produced a line about a second flood. The author said it wouldn't be a flood of water, but a flood of dark air returning. Scholars have debated the meaning. They have suggested it could refer to thick ash, perhaps from distant volcanic activity or local fires. It could also describe the gradual darkening effect caused by dust storms that blanketed the region for extended periods. Whatever the exact meaning, the author clearly described a suffocating event that followed the rising waters of the first flood. The translation then stated that the author had not recorded those warnings by choice. The text said that he had been commanded by a voice from the depths to record the message so that those who come after us may see the signs. Scholars have observed that ancient cultures often described intuition or fear as a voice. It didn't have to be something supernatural. You could be the author feeling a strong sense of duty during a crisis. The idea that the message was recorded for future survivors matched the protective casing found at the site. What disturbed the team most was the assertion that this destruction was not unique. The tablet stated that previous worlds had fallen for the same reasons. This statement echoed several ancient beliefs that civilizations rise and fall in repeated cycles. It corresponded to the flood narratives linked to Ziusudra, and to the layers of destruction found throughout Mesopotamia. The author clearly believed he was witnessing a recurring pattern. The team barely had time to process the meaning of those lines. The translation began to shift in tone. The next section moved away from collapsing skies and rising waters. She was pointing to something far more specific. She was indicating a threat that didn't come from above or from the rivers. It came from the ground beneath her feet. The tablet speaks of what lived before us. The room fell silent as the next section of the translation appeared. The language was darker and heavier. The tone seemed different from previous warnings about storms, crop failures, and darkened skies. The author shifted from describing the collapse of Shurupak to describing something he believed existed long before the flood. The first line stated that the Great Flood had not been sent to destroy humans. It said that the waters were meant to extinguish something else. The tablet claimed that there were beings who lived before humans became the rulers of the plains. The translation described them as those who have no breath. The next line said they walked in the shadows. Another stated that they fed on stillness. The team immediately questioned how the AI had produced these expressions. The chief engineer repeated the same process used previously. When the system encountered a cluster of symbols that it did not recognize, it searched for the closest match in its training data. In this section, the symbols resembled patterns found on ancient Sumerian exorcism tablets. These tablets used harsh descriptions to label forces that were not human. That is why the AI suggested the expressions, "those who have no breath," and "those who walk in the shadows." These were the closest conceptual matches the machine could identify. The words were not perfect translations. They were the system's best attempt to label a type of described entity in a form it recognized. The next part of the translation stated that these beings had not been completely destroyed. The author said that the flood pushed them to the cold places on Earth, where the waters could not reach. The wording was simple and terrifying. The tablet's inscription reminded scholars of several ancient stories describing beings associated with darkness and hidden places. In Sumerian texts, the Ululu demons were frequently mentioned as creatures that lived where light did not reach. They were described as forces that thrived in silent, untouched spaces underground or within abandoned structures. Their presence generally signaled danger or imbalance in the natural world. Scholars have also noted similarities with Babylonian descriptions of the Apkallu. According to Babylonian tradition, the first Apkallu were wise beings who lived before the flood. After the flood, these beings were said to return in damaged or altered forms. Some records described a version of them emerging from deep places beneath the earth. These corrupted Apkallu were seen as warnings of a world returning to chaos. Other Mesopotamian writings told stories of spirits described as dead, yet awake. These beings were believed to exist in the deepest layers of the underworld, trapped but conscious. They were described as neither alive nor gone. Its presence was associated with earthquakes, sinkholes, and strange nocturnal apparitions. These descriptions matched the fearful tone of the tablet, which spoke of beings who survived the flood by remaining in the cold places beneath the earth. When scholars compared these ancient descriptions with the expressions generated by AI, they realized that the tablet was not inventing new ideas. It echoed concepts that already existed in the belief systems of early Mesopotamia. The tablet's warnings about breathless beings and beings that walked in the shadows coincided almost perfectly with how ancient peoples described entities they considered older than humanity itself. The correspondence was close enough to send a chill down the spine. The translation then shifted to a line that disturbed the team more than any previous passage. The author stated that these beings reappear when human arrogance grows. The text warned that new builders, who forget the memory of the depths, risk awakening what sleeps beneath them. The wording was simple, but laden with fear. The author clearly believed that the disaster that destroyed his world had not eliminated the deeper threat. The AI continued scanning and lingered on a set of symbols that described unusual signs. These included ground trembling, earth cracking, and strange flashes of light appearing near fissures. The machine flagged these symbols because they corresponded to patterns associated with geological activity. Scholars realized that the author had witnessed the earth roaring and sudden cracks in the ground during the city's final days. These details coincided with modern observations of seismic anomalies. The coincidence was unsettling. The tone of the text changed again. The next line would further heighten the fear in the room. The AI's final decoding. When the researchers reached the last section of the tablet, the AI began connecting the translated phrases to modern scientific data. For the first time in the project, the AI wasn't just translating language. It was comparing what the tablet described with patterns occurring in the real world. What most alarmed the engineers was how easily the system made these connections. It behaved as if the tablet's warnings were not ancient metaphors, but descriptions of real conditions repeating themselves in the present. The tablet mentioned rising waters where no water should rise. The AI interpreted this as a reference to sudden and unusual floods in historically dry regions. To test the statement, the AI accessed global hydrological records. It found an immediate match with modern climate-driven floods across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. In these regions, deserts are being flooded after short periods of extreme rainfall. Previously stable river systems are overflowing without warning, and cities built far from coastlines are facing water surges for which their infrastructure was never designed. The engineers were astonished to see that the system recognized a direct modern parallel in less than a second. Another phrase described the tremor beneath the ancient cities. The AI linked this to increased seismic activity in Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, regions situated on active faults that have recorded recent movements. The AI explained that ancient Mesopotamian tablets frequently associated subterranean disturbances with the opening of hidden or forbidden places. It clarified that the Sumerians did not view earthquakes as geological events, but as signs that the underworld was moving. By mapping this cultural significance with modern seismic data, the AI concluded that the tablet warned of increased activity beneath locations once considered sacred. A third line referred to lights moving beneath the great waters. Since this phrase could not be understood symbolically without losing its intended meaning, the AI treated it as a literal description and sought modern equivalents. It immediately connected it to luminous anomalies in the great ocean depths recently detected by scientific and military sensors. These anomalies emerged in three major regions. In the Mariana Trench, autonomous submersibles recorded slow-moving streaks of light, drifting more than 10,000 meters deep, far below the reach of sunlight, and in conditions where no bioluminescent life has ever been documented. In the Gulf of Aden, naval surveillance systems picked up faint, moving glows during routine thermal scans, moving in patterns that did not correspond to any known vessel or marine creature. And in the Philippine Sea, deep-sea observatories recorded pulsating illuminations at depths where even the most resilient bioluminescent species cannot survive. Each incident remains unexplained, and none have been linked to geological activity or human technology. What most puzzled engineers was the precision of the correspondence. The tablet's wording was ancient, but the phenomenon described within it aligned almost perfectly with modern data. AI flagged this alignment as statistically unusual, suggesting that the ancient author had seen or experienced something strangely similar. The tablet then moved on to a broader warning: the opening of deep places. The AI interpreted this as an ancient way of describing tectonic shifts, new fissures, and the exposure of deeper geological layers. To support this interpretation, it presented satellite images showing active crustal fractures in regions directly linked to ancient Mesopotamian settlement zones, including northern Iraq, where deep fissures have opened near Mosul, southeastern Turkey, where recent earthquakes have fractured previously stable soils, and western Iran, where newly exposed rock layers indicate increased pressure beneath the surface. The system made it clear that this was not poetic language. It was a description of a structural change in the planet itself, now occurring in the same landscapes where the civilization that wrote the tablet lived. When the AI analyzed the tablet's final warning about global destabilization, extreme weather, blocked sunlight, disappearing birds, and violent conflict, it cross-referenced this data with current global databases. Then, it produced a single, chilling conclusion: probability match. 87% alignment with current global conditions. The room fell silent. This was no longer translation. It was a prediction. And the AI was saying that the ancient author had described a collapse that had already begun. In the next instant, the system crashed and generated a final message. What comes next? When the AI finally pieced together all the remaining fragments into a complete translation, the result was unlike anything the team had expected. Until then, everyone assumed the tablet described only the flood that destroyed Shurupak, the same event preserved in the traditions of Ziusudra and later, Noah. But the complete reconstruction made something horrifyingly clear. The flood was not the event the author feared. It was merely a restart, a forced cleansing of the world, destined to erase everything that existed before humans and give the planet a new beginning. The tablet suggested that the flood was not the catastrophe itself, but a cleansing event triggered to bury or erase something much older. The real disaster, according to the text, was yet to come. The final decoded passages carried a tone of utter despair, as if the scribe were trying to warn people thousands of years in the future about a cycle destined to repeat itself. The AI displayed the line that silenced the room. The flood wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. When the cycle returns, that which was drowned also returns. Until that moment, the team believed that what had been drowned referred metaphorically to ruined cities or forgotten knowledge. But the surrounding lines abruptly changed the meaning to something more, something buried beneath the earth itself. The tablet described the earth becoming unstable, with the ground opening up in ways that terrified the author. Instead of storms or floods, the danger came from below. The text reinterprets the tablet as a physical, not supernatural warning. The author described a world shrouded in darkness, not by water, but by something in the air that would block the light. indicating an event caused by the Earth itself. He then stated that ancient forces buried by the flood would return when the cycle repeated itself. The AI clarified that these forces were not monsters or spirits, but processes, natural resources, trapped gases, ancient materials, and deep subsurface pressures could emerge when the planet experiences further ruptures. The text also mentioned a sudden silence before the disaster, something the AI linked to real scientific records of environmental calms before major earthquakes. The tablet's final message stated that the warning was for survivors of the next cycle, suggesting it wasn't written for the ancient world, but for future societies. When the team requested further analysis, the AI crashed and displayed an alert. The tablet's patterns dangerously matched current global data, making it impossible to separate the ancient description from present conditions. The conclusion was disturbing. The author believed that Earth has already gone through multiple cycles of collapse, capable of wiping out civilizations, and that these cycles don't end with the flood. They return when the same signs reappear. According to the AI, many of these signs are already visible today, which has left researchers deeply alarmed.